I want now to tell you just a bit about Bakunin's Barricade before introducing others integral to our program. We are thrilled that with this installation, the AMAM is once again part of the Front Triennial, a major undertaking putting works by more than 90 contemporary artists in over 25 venues in Northeast Ohio, masterminded by Oberlin College alumnus Fred Bidwell, class of '74. This is a huge contribution to the economic development of our region and puts Cleveland, Oberlin, and Akron even more on the artistic map than they already are. I want you also to know that both FAVA, the Firelands Association for the Visual Arts, and the Fev Restaurant in Oberlin are front sites, as is the studio of our beloved late friend and neighbor, Audra Squotus. The AMAM installation is inspired by an idea of philosopher Mikhail Bakunin, who in 1849, during the May Socialist uprising in Dresden, had the thought that he and his fellow protesters should get artworks from the National Museum and put them on the eventually 108 barricades that were being put up all over the city, reasoning that this would stop the advancing Prussian army and Saxon troops from destroying them. But his idea remained just that. It was unrealized. And in fact, the uprising was put down. More than 160 years later, Kurdish-born artist Ahmet Öğüt, having seen the Gezi Park protests in Istanbul in 2013, and well aware of many others around the world, as I'm sure you all are as well, thought to revive Bakunin's idea and put on his first Bakunin's Barricade installation in 2015 in Eindhoven in the Netherlands, using works from that museum's collection positioned on a barricade of objects that would be found in the streets. Following that successful presentation, he put on similar installations in Istanbul, Cologne, Copenhagen, Dresden, and Amsterdam. And the AMAMs is the 7th iteration and the very first outside of Europe. The installation is considered an exhibition copy. It is accompanied by a conceptual contract, not an executed contract, that Öğüt considers to be half of the artwork. It specifies that if a museum acquires the work, it must, if asked by protesters in the future, provide artworks to them to put on barricades, or else pay a penalty or make a statement indicating how their refusal to provide the works is in line with their code of ethics. Thus, it raises issues of value, law, activism, and agency. What is the power of art in a time of protest? Importantly for us, the AMAM's installation is the very first in which students participated in the process to select the artworks on the barricade, and I'll tell you more about that process in just a few moments. Now, however, I'm thrilled to introduce to you Sam Adams, the museum's new curator of modern and contemporary art, who started with us in May, coming most recently from the De Cordova Sculpture Park and Museum in Massachusetts. Sam is already diving into the Allens collection with many ideas for future presentations, and will be giving a Tuesday Tea Talk next week on the 13th at 3 p.m. in the East Gallery behind me, and I urge you to come to that. Sam is going now to put the work into some context, so please join me in welcoming Sam to the podium.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Andrea, and for being here. It's great to meet you all. And I would like to offer a bit of context around Ahmet's project and the mode in which he is working, which is often referred to as the artist as curator. So I made a graphic. The artist, in my view, is someone who absorbs the world around them and expresses their perspective through a personal, idiosyncratic, creative, and often playful studio practice or social-based practice, and is beholden really only to their personal values and aesthetics, a generalization. The private art collector who acquires and displays art according to their personal taste, again, not really beholden to anyone or any body of regulations. The archivist or registrar, so moving into the institution now, who organizes, catalogs, stores, and cares for the material stability of the artworks in their collection, and is strictly beholden to state-of-the-field standards in conservation and library science. And the curator, who also cares for an art collection, as well as conducts research on it and makes it accessible to diverse publics, and is beholden to an institutional mission, to their board and trustees, and to historical and scholarly training that they've undergone. And so as a result, the the curator often presents an art collection in a way that is chronological, geographically, or medium-based. This mode of working, the artist as curator draws on all of those different trainings and is often traced back to the Kunstkammer, Wunderkammer, or cabinets of curiosity in 16th century Europe, which grew out of private princely collections and did conform to a sort of taxonomic or sort of classification system, but it was individual to the collector of this particular Kunstkammer or object collection. Moving into the modern period, I turned to an object in the Allen's collection, Marcel Duchamp's Boîte en Valise, which Duchamp made in the years 35 to 41, right before he moved from Paris to New York, knowing that his work would not be as well known in the United States. And so he created miniature versions of his most iconic works, and then he sold them so that people could, he could sort of travel with them under his arm, but people could also take the works out, play with them, reorganize them so that the collector, also engaging with play, as Ahmet has, could be a curator of their own collection. In Sao Paulo in 1968, the architect Lina Bobardi designs the new museum there, which is still standing today, and reinstalls their permanent collection on these glass easels that she constructed. And so instead of conforming to a sort of chronological, geographic, or medium-specific display, she created these affective relationships, this sort of new network, and like Duchamp's Boîte en Valise, that the viewer could find their own pathway through art history, as it were. Andy Warhol has practiced this mode, most famously in his project Raid the Icebox, which toured to multiple different venues, which invited him into their storage facilities, 1969 to 70. And he raised eyebrows of museum professionals because he found duplicates of artworks in storage and showed these objects together. And the museum professionals were like, oh, well, actually, Warhol in the modern era, an object is prized and valued for its originality, its authenticity, its singularity. And so when you do that, it really throws value into question. So as Andrea mentioned, value is something that Ahmet is playing with and is interested in, the way that a certain display in a certain grouping can sort of alter our notions around an object's value. And then to just turn to a very recent example of an artist that I've presented this work before elsewhere. Rosa Barba is an Italian filmmaker, video artist, who was given access to some of the world's greatest storage facilities, the Capitoline Museum in Rome, the Tate Modern in London, the Nationalgalerie in Berlin, and created these videos of sort of torch-lit discussions happening between paintings on the storage racks. And in storage, works that were made centuries apart live next to each other in darkness and are constantly in conversations that we would never have in the galleries. And then lastly, just to say that one of the most iconic practitioners of this mode, the artist as curator, is Fred Wilson, who is really looking at colonial legacies and the way that they endure in art collections and the presentation and interpretation of those collections. And so he was invited to Oberlin and worked with our collection here at the Allen in the room that we're sitting in 2016. And as well as that, the Allen sort of has a tradition of this. In the last iteration of Front, we invited Barbara Bloom to also mine our collection and do a project, and she is also a sort of artist as curator. So thinking about the exhibition of artworks as an artwork in itself, and the exhibition as a medium of art, just thinking about these roles and the way that Ahmet is injecting a sort of element of playfulness that I, as a curator, don't feel I could take. I could not really ever seriously suggest to my boss putting artwork up on a chain link fence 40 feet up in the air. And so, or maybe I could, we'll find out. But like I said, I'm also beholden to my own training and the standards of my field, which are different than an artist. And so that kind of project is extremely exciting. I was so fortunate to arrive at the moment when the logistical parts of it had already been planned, because it really does ask the institution to take risks and to take on an element of playfulness that we don't always as museums. So thank you, Andrea, for spearheading this incredible project. Thank you to Ahmet for giving it to us and to the students who worked on it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sam. I would say, by all means, suggest putting works on barricades again, or whatever you want to do. I know you're going to want to do something different than Ahmet, and that makes it exciting for all of us in Oberlin to see what Sam is going to do next. So now to the students and recent grads who worked on the installation. During Ahmet's visit to us last December, he chose 80 works that he saw with me and with the museum's 2 preparators. And you see on this slide, many of you will know, I think in town, John Seyfried, who's a photographer that works with us and helped with the installation. But you also see Andrei Septavik, who is our chief preparator, then Ahmet, and then Michael Reynolds, our assistant preparator, who worked on this project very hard. So last December, Ahmet came and chose 80 works he saw in storage with me and with Andre and Michael. And he chose those 80 as basically sort of a long list from which he intended to choose approximately 10 to 12 for inclusion in the final installation. And there you see a close-up of them as well. 14 students who were from their first year up to their 4th year at Oberlin this past spring semester, then each researched 5 or 6 of those 80 works. And from that research and a Zoom with Ahmet, the list was cut to a smaller one. And then ultimately, when he was here in July to install the barricade, he chose 13 works that are now installed. So among those 13, there is diversity in terms of artist background, some representation of Oberlin's own history, diversity of media, all of which were important to him, as well as, in addition to those considerations, students were asked to think about whether the works were related to any protests or social movements, and to make recommendations regarding whether any given work should ultimately be included or perhaps not included. And so now what I want to do is turn it over to the students to tell you about their work, and they are going to introduce themselves as they do so.
Hi everyone, I'm Biba. I'm a 4th year and I'm an art history major with a minor in studio art. I have worked at the Allen in a few capacities, but currently I'm a gallery guide here. And I'm here to talk a little bit about Horace Pippin's Harmonizing, which is included in the Barricade. And I'll start with a little bit on Pippin himself. He grew up in Westchester, Pennsylvania, and served in World War I in an all-Black infantry, the first one ever, actually. And when he returned from the war, he was paralyzed in his right arm. And it's said that afterwards, when he became an artist, which was only later in his life, he moved back to Westchester, Pennsylvania, and held up his paralyzed arm with his other arm with the paintbrush propped inside to create the paintings that he made, which were often familial or familiar scenes. So this was research I'd conducted beforehand in other capacities for a Sunday object talk, for instance. And when it was brought up as one of my potential pieces to research, I jumped on it because I knew looking at it from another perspective would be required by front research and Öğüt himself. And something he asked for us to look at broadly was this idea of finding some aspect of social justice or diversity within these works. And in this work, when I approached it from that perspective and point of view, the research I conducted shifted more towards the contradictions or differences in the piece and the visual symbolism that I discovered in it and would like to relay a little bit. I will say, as I am speaking about the piece, I will also be in the museum, but also by the Barricade afterwards, and I'd love to speak further on this. But I would like to point out now that the piece is extremely detailed, and embedded in those details, you'll see lots of vertical lines and lots of divisions. Though it is a very happy, jovial piece, it shows a familiar scene in his own neighborhood, so it's very close to Pippin himself. There are divisions in the back wall, there are divisions in the perspective and use of figures, and that divisiveness seems to convey the 1940s segregation and racism that Pippin faced daily, even in a place as familiar as his own neighborhood. The piece, I think, also adds a really bright, jovial energy to the Barricade. It's positioned right at the front, so there's space to go up and look at those details very closely, and I encourage you all to do so after this. But I will say that those differences are found within those details. And I hope you all find a few yourself. I'll pass it on to Park.
Hi, everyone. I'm Parker Niles. I am a fourth-year religion major, and I have to switch the slide. Cool. Okay. So this process of research for me was a really interesting way of looking more at about the Allen's collection and about the history of the museum. I learned a lot of interesting things about the different exhibitions we've had in the past, the collaboration with different artists, just the expansiveness of our collection, so that we have a lot to offer, basically. So behind me is untitled from the portfolio 7 Miles a Second. It is a collaboration between David Wojnarowicz and James Romberger. James Romberger was the cartoonist for this piece. He's a New York-based cartoonist. He's really known for his cityscapes, and he's also worked on projects like Tales from the Crypt and Hellblazer. And David Wojnarowicz was a New York East Village-based AIDS activist and gay liberation activist. He was more of a artist activist, so he worked in a variety of mediums. He worked in film. He published in a collection of essays and personal journals. He did paintings. He did drawings. He kind of dabbled in all sorts of mediums, and so his art is really unique. And this is a really unique collaboration. So this 7 Miles a Second is actually a graphic novel that they made together, and it was published after his death in 1993. And so this is a panel from the book, and in the book it is David in the hospital dying from AIDS-related complications, and he is narrating all of this text. He supplies the entirety of the text for the novel to James Romberger. And it is a collection of memories. It is stories from his own life. It is diatribes. It is fantasy. It is dreams. It's a collection of all these different things that James Romberger puts excellently onto the page. And it's a bit difficult to make out because of the image and because I can't really read the text. But this panel from the comic, it is David reflecting on his past lover, who he also lost to AIDS-related complications. And it's a bit of a gory image. It's very striking. I remember seeing this in my first year here at Oberlin, and it really just immediately caught my eye, and it became a fascination for me almost. And it's just reflecting on death, on the nature of the body, what it means to be intimate with somebody, and then watch that person die. It's about a lot of things. And I mean, I would also recommend reading the book. It's really beautiful. And I recommended this piece for the exhibition for two reasons. One, because of the uniqueness of the medium as a graphic novel and as like a different way of looking at art or a different way of considering what art is in this context. And because I really wanted to cement and highlight Wojnarowicz in the legacy of American activism, especially in American AIDS activism. And so I hope I definitely achieved that with that piece. And it's also hard to see in this image up here, but it is on the top left corner. So it is at the high end of the piece. So go and look for it. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Anna, and I'm a third-year art history major here at Oberlin. I'm so excited to be here today and to be talking about my research for the front installation. Which provided me with the opportunity to learn a lot about the life and work of Ellen Johnson, whom these two portraits are of, and for whom the very gallery that the installation is in was named for. On the left is a portrait done by the Swedish artist Nisa Zetterberg, likely during Ellen Johnson's time getting a master's degree in Sweden. And the second is by American artist Alice Neal, towards the end of Johnson's career. And I just wanted to speak a little bit about her life. Ellen Johnson graduated Oberlin in 1933 and worked as a professor in the art history department from 1939 to 1977, as an art librarian at the Clarence Ward Art Library, and as a curator of modern and contemporary art here at the Allen from 1973 to 1977. She founded the art rental program that Oberlin students cherish to this day, commissioned the Klaus Oldenburg three-way plug that sits outside the art library, and resided at our very own Frank Lloyd Wright house, which is filled with her collection of priceless works that were left to Oberlin and the AMAM after her death in 1992. Johnson brought a dedication to her career and to creating increased accessibility in the arts and art history in particular for women. And she used her position as a contemporary art collector, a curator, an art historian, and a self-described feminist to make more voices heard. Though she gained her art history degree through the study of modern masters like Cezanne, Picasso, and the like, Johnson developed many close friendships and intellectual relationships with living artists and art historians, particularly women. She was also the author of 7 books, including one on Eva Hesse, who the Allen now owns her collected drawings and writings. Clearly, Ellen Johnson was an impressive person with an impressive career, especially for a woman of her time, in which home and family often had to come first for her peers. The selection of 5 works that I was given to research for the front installation included a lot of Oberlin-related works, and these 2 portraits of Johnson. The 2 portraits, I think, frame her life almost perfectly. The Zetterberg piece shows Johnson as a young woman beginning her career, and the Alice Neal reflects a woman whose years and accomplishments are numerous. The Zetterberg was chosen in the end to be placed on the barricade, and it's kind of hidden behind the front of the truck there. And it was chosen, I believe, because of its smaller size in relation to some of the other portraits that were included. But the artist did want to include Johnson in the barricade because of her history with Oberlin and with this institution. Both images of Johnson reflect an integral part of Oberlin's art world and of the inclusion of women within art history and related fields as a discipline, leading me to believe that they would be just right for inclusion on this installation, especially since it wants to highlight Oberlin and forward-thinking art. The Zetterberg portrait of Ellen Johnson hangs in the background of the barricade in the gallery named for her between car parts and lampposts, just as Johnson herself, in a sense, hangs as an ever-present figure in the background of this institution. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Zach Terrillion. I am a 3rd year here at Oberlin. I use he, they pronouns, and I am an English major with a creative writing minor. And the piece I want to talk to you about today is by contemporary American artist Kiki Smith. It is untitled from the 1995 series Honey Wax. You can see it indicated by the red arrow there. And kind of what I want to talk about in like the few, got my mask. Kind of what I want to talk about in the next few minutes is just a basic overview of the image and how it connects to the messages and motifs of Smith's larger body of work, as well as connections to the theme of the barricade itself. So first, just to provide a very basic description of the image, it is an ectacolor print of a sculpture. The sculpture appears to depict a female or at least feminine form that is reclined into a slumbering position with eyes shut, with its right hand or arm arranged in what appears to be a fisting position. It is very hard to see because it's just a snapshot of the larger sculpture. And I think what's most interesting about the sculpture is the material that is made out of. As the title sort of spoils, it is made out of beeswax and various pigments, so a very unusual material for a sculpture, but is very typical of Smith's body of work. She was touted by artist Chuck Close as a great recycler. She tends to use recycled, unconventional, or just natural earthly materials for her pieces, and beeswax is a perfect example of this. She is taking, she's basically taking this beeswax, this natural material, and she is repurposing it, not letting it go to waste, and putting it into a practical use in an art project, and practical use in an art project. And I feel like this has some very interesting thematic relations because it is connecting almost, in a way, Smith is almost kind of recreating her own creation myth. She's using natural materials, and from those natural materials, she's creating humanity. She is closely connecting humanity to its natural origins. And then something else I want to talk about with the image is the sculpture, like the way that the sculpture looks. Another tenet of Smith's work is that she tends to focus on bodies and bodily processes and depicting these bodily functions and bodies with with great biological precision, so very much unglamorized, very realistic, very natural. And you can definitely see that here just because it just has so many imperfections. It's almost like the bottom half of the head is almost like melting, it's corroded. The ear is like this just cavernous hole. There's all these little venous tunnels and splotches and things such as that. The nose is almost a bit more bunched up. It is very much imperfect. It's a polar opposite of what you might see with Greco-Roman sculpture, where it's like very smooth, very ideal, very perfect. And I feel like the way that Smith chooses to depict bodies this way almost does conform to the theme of the Barricade, which centers around ideas of rebellion, in opposition to the status quo. And sort of depicting bodies in this way, she possibly might be opposing the status quo of how bodies are typically depicted in these idealized forms within culture and society. And this also makes sense considering that Smith is an avid feminist and social activist. Many of her early exhibitions focused on themes of domestic violence and women's responses against such violence, as well as much of her work was made in response to the AIDS crisis, to which she lost many friends and even her sibling. In response to the AIDS crisis, many of her bodies are described as queer or non-normative. And I feel like this descriptor fits this image very well. So then one final thing I did want to discuss regarding the sculpture is that we don't actually have the sculpture. It is just a print of the sculpture on display. And I feel like this is very interesting, especially when this is in fact one of two Kiki Smith pieces that we have. There is the sculpture, there's the print that is outlined in the red, but then directly right next to it is the hat, which is another sculpture by Smith. So we have a physical sculpture by Smith and also a print of a sculpture by Smith. So it's a very interesting contrast, especially with those two images or two works of art placed so closely together. And from my research, it seems that Smith often used photography as a means of documenting her artistic process. So I'm not sure, so it's unclear what her overall intent thematically might have been with utilizing a print instead of a physical sculpture, but it's definitely something worth considering. Yes, thank you so much for listening.
Hi.
Oh, that's okay. I just want to say something. Thank you so much to the four speakers you just heard are current Oberlin College students. And we're also just really so pleased that two students who last spring were fourth-year students and graduated in June are now working full-time in post-baccalaureate positions at the museum, one in our academic programs office and one in our education department. And now they are going to be able to tell you a bit not only about their research on the project, but also how the installation is informing their current work. So take it away.
Hi, for real this time. My name is Julia Alexander, and I recently graduated from Oberlin in June. I was a voice performance major, and I actually worked at the front desk during my time as a student. And I am now working as a curatorial assistant in the academic programs department. And I'm absolutely so excited to be here today. So one of the pieces that I suggested for the Barricade, and I'm so thrilled to see on it, is this folded paper drawing by Saul LeWitt. So Saul LeWitt was a minimalist artist, and he was known for doing these big cube structures, and he did these like chalk drawings that could be installed on gallery walls by anyone. So this folded paper drawing, he did actually a number of them, and it was in his intent that they would be affordable and more accessible. So he sold them for a purposefully lower cost than many of his other pieces. So I thought that was very relevant for this type of work. He was a conceptual artist, and he specifically really enjoyed the idea of the dematerialization of art. He believed that even a dynamic idea could be considered art. So the Barricade is an idea, essentially. It moves from museum to museum, and it kind of comes to be looking different every time. So it's been in Europe and now it's here at the Allen, and it's filled with pieces of trash from Oberlin, which is really special that we get to have that community tie-in to this piece of art. So I was really compelled by the simplicity of this piece. He called it a drawing because the lines formed on the folded paper are just like the lines of a drawing, which I think is really neat. So we've been excited to present this work to many classes that are coming to the Allen. Academic Programs is the department that organizes class visits from Oberlin College. And so, of course, this is a great piece for law and society classes. We even have the contract on the wall. So there's so much to talk about with that. We have a plan for a studio art class to come, and they're going to sit in the Ellen Johnson Gallery and draw the Barricade and really spend time with it, which is really special. And we also have a first-year seminar coming on professional athlete activism that's going to use the Barricade as part of the teaching for the class. It's super exciting. So I'm just thrilled that we have this as a tool to teach with for the whole semester, and it's going to be utilized by so many classes and be seen by so many students and others. And it's so special because the Barricade, at the end of the day, I feel like is as much a part of Oberlin as it is a piece of art to look at. So thank you.
Biba, do you mind getting this? Thank you. Hi all, I'm Ellis. I also recently graduated. I use he, him pronouns. When I was a student, I majored in art history and minored in comparative American studies. I currently work as the curatorial assistant to the education department. And previous to that, I was also a gallery guide involved in this research. So the piece I would like to focus on, and the one I most confidently recommended, is this one here. This is Doris Salcedo's piece called Untitled. It's made of commonly found materials. She uses that through all of her works. This one is shirts themselves with gesso and rebar. So when we were doing this research, as others have mentioned, what we're looking specifically for is artist diversity, themes about protest and uprising in any Ohio connection. So while there wasn't any specific Ohio connection with this piece, she does have strong correlation to uprising in all of her works. And Salcedo herself is a Colombian-born female artist. She focuses on silenced lives of the marginalized. So all of her works have themes of absence or oppression and juggling different power dynamics, whose narrative is told and whose is silenced. This piece explores one of those narratives that is silenced. So it's made when she was a part of the art as activism movement, which continues through this day. It's a contemporary movement. And her work she describes as mental archaeology. And it's this idea of uncovering political and emotive sentiments that are hidden behind these historic meanings through her art. And a lot of them also interrogate these militaristic governments. So this piece, Untitled, is a commemorative work that's reflecting on a 1988 mass murder of banana plantation workers in Colombia. Excuse me. So that occurred when union workers were threatened by the government there that they would be killed if they voted in upcoming elections. It doesn't specify what, but according to my research, likely pertaining to union elections and local elections. They were given 2 weeks to flee, and when they didn't, the military returned and massacred them all. In the following court case, the military officials involved were initially convicted, but then the same military personnel involved then murdered the judges. And in the 5 years that followed, they considered it to be too lengthy a process and acquitted them of all charges. Most significantly in my research, this was not considered a notable attack. And this was similar research to what Salcedo herself uncovered when she was working at a university in Colombia. So while there isn't an Ohio connection, I also saw the significance of her connection to universities and teaching as just another way that this incorporated into our barricade. So this piece physically in the barricade is located at this red arrow here, tucked away in a tractor tire. So in itself, it's hard to see, both because of the materials are commonly found, much like all the others in the barricade, and it's sort of hidden, which is just another echoing of the story itself. That's been this hidden narrative that the artist is working to recreate and bring back. With the barricade, I really view it as this tension piece. It's exploring this idea of violence and political unrest, but it's also offering this hope of protection, right? The barricade can offer you protection. In this artist, I consider hopeful view that art itself can act as that power. But while it's a very heavy topic, we have been working it into children's stories, actually. So in my current position in the education department, our main focus is community outreach and community connection. And our main path of that is through tours. So for the semester, we've been giving tours through ages K through 5th grade. So the presentations I've been giving on this work are for children ages around 5 to 12. And when we have these sort of conversations with them, it's hard. It's not the same way you would approach it with adults. So the way we usually open it up is introducing the concept of a barricade, because for so many children of that age, that's a word or a concept that they haven't heard of. And with that, introducing them to the idea of protest, we go to this question of, when do you stand up for what you believe in? And they start to give their own voice to their beliefs about their own individual power. And it also unlocks the idea that art can be a tool of power. It's not just something they create and they love to do in their free time. It's actually something that's really powerful, and in that sense can empower them. So that's been one of my favorite things of this position, is both seeing the progression of this installation, because I started just after it opened, and also seeing just the wide range of views and opinions that you get from people in the gallery. Everyone takes away their own detail and their own meaning from it. So whether or not you see art as this powerful tool, it sparks conversation because of that sort of tension within the work itself. Thank you.